The reality is we had the first bid from Liverpool yesterday. I believe that was turned down. And from this point onwards, let's see what happens.
Eddie Howe there, speaking over the weekend about his star striker, Alexander Isak, as the transfer saga of the summer continues to unfold. Last Friday, Newcastle rejected a bid of over £100 million for him. But for them and their supporters, is this as much an identity test as a transfer story? Would letting him go, even for a British record transfer fee, represent a sliding doors moment for the whole project on Tyneside? And beyond Isak, right across this summer's transfer window, are we seeing maybe the clearest signs yet that football's transfer system is broken? Could Isak be the subject of the very last transfer saga? We'll try to explain why. Welcome to the Sports Agents. Hello, hope you're okay. Just me today. Gabby on holiday for a little while. It's all about Alexander Isak and the transfer system on this pod. So the Athletic's George Caulkin will join us in a little while to talk all about that. And we'll get a legal perspective on it as well. A quick reminder to make sure you hit subscribe and follow wherever you're listening or watching to the pod. We've had some big interviews recently. Tom Brady, legendary NFL quarterback, was on with us last week. We've also had a UK exclusive interview with the WWE icon Triple H. But let's get into today's pod. We're going to focus on Newcastle and Alexander Isak, and the Athletic's George Caulkin will join us after this. George, thank you very much for joining us. They're in a mess, aren't they? Here, externally, it looks like they're in a mess.
Yeah, I'm laughing. I don't really know why I'm laughing. There are tears behind my laughter. Yeah, it's been a really disappointing summer all round. I mean, this was the summer when it was supposed to be different. Obviously, they've just won their first domestic trophy for 70 years. They've qualified for the Champions League for the second time in 3 years. And after 3 consecutive windows of not bringing in a first-team ready player, they had money to spend. But it's... I mean, it kind of makes me laugh in the sense that, you know, after all those years of being terrible, it kind of shows you that being good is actually quite difficult. As well. You know, they've been operating or trying to operate in the same market as the established, I guess you'd say, big 6 clubs in terms of who they're trying to buy, and have not been able to do that successfully. And it's a story of Newcastle, the team, just pulling way ahead of Newcastle, the club.
And when you say that Newcastle, the team, have pulled so far ahead of Newcastle, the club, is that and we talk about it a lot on this podcast, it might not be the sexiest thing for football fans, but is that an infrastructure executive area whereby the team have pulled ahead of the club?
It's kind of everything, really. I mean, you know, you just have to kind of go back to what happened post-takeover. They avoid relegation, and then the following season they qualify for the Champions League, and that was way ahead of schedule. It was, you know, yes, they spent a lot of money. It was a fantastic job by Eddie Howe and the players, but the whole infrastructure of the club was not ready for that. I mean, so Mike Ashley hadn't left the club debt, but in terms of the commercial and marketing, everything had been cut back to the quick. It was a skeleton staff. Departments had to be built up from almost nothing. And, you know, albeit in their last published accounts, I think their revenue, I think it was up by 28%. It was, you know, that's, you know, it's kind of good figures, great growth, all that sort of stuff. In terms of the money they're bringing in, they're just blown out of the water by the more established clubs, and they just can't compete. So, you know, so in terms of Alexander Isak, if you're talking about what he could command at Newcastle in terms of wages, they just couldn't put up the kind of money that a team like Liverpool could put up. And of course, that's a big problem when you've got really good players who are looking around and thinking, well, Mo Salah is my peer here, or Erling Haaland is my peer here, or, you know, we've won a trophy, we're in the Champions League, so we should be getting paid that amount of money. But like, it just, in terms of the executive structure, at the moment they've got no sporting director because Paul Mitchell put in his notice and has gone and hasn't been replaced.
And I suppose, George, that's the area that I would focus on with the follow-up question, which is, he put in his notice, didn't he? So they knew he was going. but also, what had he done in the last 12 months as well, I suppose? That it's a two-pronged question.
Yeah, and they've had their chief executive has been on notice since Darren Hill, since saying he had blood cancer, and obviously wish him well, and he's now on medical leave. So at the moment they've got those big decision making positions at the top of the club are not filled. They will be, but in terms of this summer, which is obviously massive for them, they're not there. Yeah, I mean it feels like negligence to be having this sort of level of flux at the top of the club, because I had the same thing 12 months ago as well. Paul Mitchell, yeah, I mean, he was brought in to succeed Dan Ashworth, very much with the eye on recruitment. And of course, in terms of first team ready players, that recruitment, didn't happen. Now, he would argue from his perspective that he wasn't aware just how difficult things were in terms of PSR, and didn't sign players in January for the sake of it, for example, that would have pushed them nearer to their limit. And if he has a legacy, I suppose it was of trimming players as opposed to adding players. But again, this window, Newcastle obviously wanted to be in a position where they were fully prepared, and they haven't been able to kind of get over the line with a lot of their big players. It's difficult to point fingers directly at individual people. As I say, there are people who aren't there. Some of this feels like circumstance. Some of it feels like a bit of negligence. But, and in terms of the overall owners of the club, something that's been said from the start is how everything takes a long time and too long. And in football, as you know, you've just got to be fleet of foot.
I suppose when it comes to actually signing the players, it's one thing at the moment to be outmaneuvered by Liverpool.
Yeah.
But it's worrying, isn't it, to be outmaneuvered by Manchester United when and I can say that at the moment, when you think of what Newcastle can offer at the moment. That's the sort of, each transfer deal is different, and the James Trafford thing they couldn't do anything about because of the buyback clause that Manchester City had with Burnley. So on the one hand, they're victims of circumstance, but on the other, there would still be questions about why are you losing out to certain clubs.
Yeah, I mean, with Man City, I mean, they obviously spent a year or more on James Trafford, and if they'd paid what Burnley were asking for, then it would have happened, and they didn't. I mean, whether that would have been good value or not is, of course, is a very different question. I know what you mean. I think Brian Mbeumo is I guess kind of one of those players that we're talking about. He was top of Newcastle's list in terms of right wingers, right-sided forwards. And by the end, and they felt they had a good chance of getting him. By the end, they didn't even submit a bid to Brentford because they were told he preferred Man United. Now, why would anybody prefer Man United to Newcastle at this moment? Again, that's a matter of debate. But Newcastle aren't Man United. They do have the Champions League. They don't have the wage structure. They don't have the cachet. They don't have the global presence. Not yet. That's what they want. But and Manchester United have the history. I mean, that's not somebody anybody at Newcastle wants to admit, but it is a reality.
Where are they at with Isak then?
It's just so delicate, and I have to be brutally honest. My opinion on it changes hour to hour. Obviously, he has now reported back to Newcastle to training. At the time of us speaking, he's been at the training ground today. The first team and coaching staff, they've just come back from East Asia where they've been on tour. Obviously, Isak didn't go with them, so there's still such a lot to play out. In an ideal world, Newcastle wanted to keep him. They wanted to sign him to a new contract. I think that moment, passed a while ago. And again, if talking about Paul Mitchell or what happened on his watch, they were talking about this over a year ago, and then discussions were put on hold because of that PSR situation, or that was the reason given. Liverpool have made their bid. That bid was below the expression of interest they'd given a couple of weeks previously, which is a strange negotiating tactic. That didn't go down very well. Newcastle say they value him at £150 million. They don't want to lose him, but what they can't do is lose him without having somebody in the door that at least comes some way to compensating what they would lose.
And therefore, if they get someone through the door, do you think they will allow him to go?
Well, I think that becomes a discussion point again. I mean, Liverpool were suggesting at the end of last week they wouldn't come back. I don't think anybody at Newcastle took that at face value. And of course, the other point is what Isak does at this point when he does have discussions with Eddie Howe, whether he does try and make life difficult. One thing that's been very noticeable about Newcastle's stance, about their approach, is that they've kept all escape routes open. There hasn't been. I mean, there were some stronger comments from Howe last night after their friendly against Spurs, where he sort of said you have to earn the right to train with Newcastle. We are Newcastle United. If you behave badly, I mean, he was talking. Didn't mention Isak directly. If you behave the wrong way, you can't just expect to come back into training. But they haven't criticised him directly. They haven't criticised him in public. They say they can still rehabilitate him. But you feel that it's, with all these huge, big transfers, they always feel like they're coordinated. You always feel like, and so big players have been reintegrated before at other clubs, but I wouldn't put money on it either way.
So there's still a party that thinks if they came to him and offered him 280 grand a week on a 5-year deal with a sort of nod and a wink that if next season isn't as successful you can go, do you think he might stay?
Well, I mean, the issue is that somebody has to bid. I mean, so yeah. Liverpool would have to bid again. So that's the starting point. Newcastle would have to find a replacement. So that at the moment, that's Benjamin Sesko. That's those talks are ongoing. That approach is ongoing. The RB Leipzig player, and all those things being equal, they would have to then have a sense that Isak would be prepared to knuckle down and get on with things. So that's what I mean. It sort of has to play out. I think, what they've previously done with somebody like Bruno Guimaraes, they gave him a new contract and there was a release clause, there was a get out clause, which came into effect last summer and nobody hit it. I mean, if they could get another year out of Isak, I think they would be doing very, very well at this point, having allowed matters to get here. But again, it usually when you're in this position, things move in one direction, and that is in the player leaving. But again, I just wouldn't put money on it.
How I can't work out whether if they missed out on Sesko and he went to Manchester United as well, that actually helps them, because they then go to Isak. We haven't got anybody. You literally can't. We can't let you go this summer.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I mean, it's Newcastle needed reinforcements in that position anyway. They allowed Callum Wilson to leave at the end of his contract, and in the last 4 pre-season games, they've either had Will Asula starting up front, someone an under 21 Denmark international who's not started a Premier League game for Newcastle, or in the last game against Spurs, Anthony Gordon playing up front. Anthony Gordon, just to digress very briefly, was Alexander Isak this time last year. He'd had his head turned by Liverpool. Newcastle had been in discussions with Liverpool as they reached that kind of PSR deadline, and it was a really tough season for him. But Howe has brought him back, and he looks sort of revitalized this summer, which is kind of good news when there isn't much else good news. So it can be done.
That's the other thing, isn't it, though? I mean, you mentioned Anthony Gordon there. Sort of finally on this is that Isak goes, and then all of a sudden, other players are thinking, hang on a minute, hang on. Yeah. We thought we were going in this direction, and all of a sudden that completely changes the dynamic for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they would have, if Isak goes, they would have even more room for manoeuvre to spend. That's, again, is theoretical, because it's not, spending money has been a problem this summer. It's not having money, it's about spending it that's been a problem. So theoretically they could go out and spend big, but this kind of comes back to that point I made about the team outstripping the club. Here you've got a club that has talked a lot about a new stadium, for example. It's talked a lot about a new training ground, that these things have been sort of on the cards. There have been developments, but there's been no tangible progress as of yet. Now, would that affect Alexander Isak in the here and now? No, probably not. But like at the same, if say for example Newcastle have a dodgy run of results, Eddie Howe would be able to say, yeah, okay, things are tough right now, but look, this is the club we're building. You can see, there are spades in the ground in terms of a training ground, and our training ground will be the best in Europe. Look at this stadium. The stadium is going to be beautiful. And if you have those two things going in parallel, you can at least show progress. But the point is that, I mean, yes, they've done the stuff behind the scenes. I'm not trying to say they've done nothing, but in terms of these like really big, ambitious projects, nothing's happened. And so it's been the first team that has been, that has shown all the progress. It's tangible, it's obvious. They've won a trophy, they're in the Champions League again, but the club itself, it hasn't happened yet. And I do think that is damaging in moments like this.
So are the owners under, I don't know if pressure's the right word, and for a variety of reasons, they've always been under scrutiny, I suppose. But are there just maybe a few more questions being asked?
There definitely are questions. I mean, because this has been such a bad summer and it's been a bad year. I mean, off the pitch, it's been a bad year. So again, huge churn at the top of the club. No great, we were told that something about the stadium would be imminent. That was this time last year. And really, it's just been incremental sort of updates about where they are in, pre-planning and things like that. No decision has actually been taken on whether they move or whether they stay at St James's. And once the button is pressed on something like that, it takes a big weight off the shoulder around the club, because you can say, well, it's going to take years, but it's definitely happening. Here's a sign of proper ambition. And so there's pressure on a lot of people, and there is this thought that contrary to how it was certainly in the first couple of years, 2 or 3 years post takeover, that kind of Howe is doing his alchemy in spite of what's happening at the top of the club and not because of it.
I mean, for many years, every time we did a podcast together, it was just sort of middle-aged, miserable cynicism. And then you broke out of that for I stayed in it, but you broke out of it for maybe 18 months. So are we back to joint middle-aged cynicism together?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I hope I've never truly lost that, but it's funny. I think about this a lot because, as a kid and as a young man, and then as an increasingly sort of cynical journalist, the thing that I always thought about was Newcastle winning something, and there have been moments over the years where either through indifference, through incompetence, through not trying, through all of those things, that has felt so distant. And I saw Newcastle do that last season. And what I'd never contemplated was that there was anything after that. And I know it sounds stupid. I mean, I know that football carries on, but it was always been like, what I want is for Newcastle to win a trophy. And now they've done it. And so what happens next? I mean, so there is a part of me that that sort of doesn't want to be angry anymore. And having seen them do that, I do feel fulfilled. But of course, the problem is that, once you see it happen once, you want to see it happen again, and you want to see the club make the most of their opportunities. If nothing else, a bit of grumpiness is very familiar to me. It's like pulling on like an old cardigan or dressing gown or something. It fits beautifully, and let's face it, a bit of a moan. That's what football's all about. Surely it's not about winning stuff, is it?
I don't need to add anything to that. That's just the best place to leave it. Thank you.
Very well.
Thank you, George. Now, next, we're going to look at whether the entire transfer system is actually being torn apart behind the scenes, because last summer there was this story involving the former Arsenal-Chelsea midfielder Lassana Diarra, who was trying to get out of his contract with Lokomotiv Moscow. Well, the upshot of all of that was a wider discussion and legal case about whether the transfer system is actually fit for purpose. And it has led to FIFA facing a multi-million-pound class action lawsuit. Well, Dolf Segaar is leading that lawsuit. He's a sports lawyer and a board member of the Justice for Players Foundation, and he joins us next. Dolf, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. It's such a complicated issue. For those of us without a legal mind. So can you take us back to the Diarra ruling, first of all, and if possible, briefly summarise what that was and where it's left us?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. Now, well, Diarra had an employment agreement with his former club, and he wanted to change clubs. But his employer didn't want to let him go. So he terminated his employment agreement, as they say, without just cause, meaning that there was no real legal ground to terminate his employment. But he did. And according to FIFA rules, the transfer rules for players, you have to compensate your former club because you breached your agreement. And it is not very clear under the existing rules at the time what exactly compensated what the compensation should be. So there was a court case about the compensation, and in the end, he had to pay his former employer 10.5 million euros. But according to the rules of the FIFA, at the same time, your new club becomes jointly liable for payment of that compensation. So it is very hard for a player who leaves his club after termination of his employment agreement without just cause to find a new employer, because they fear they have to pay this enormous amount. So that hinders his opportunities to find a new employment. At the end he did, but it cost him a lot of problems. He started proceedings before FIFA where the 10.5 million was granted to his former club. Then he went to CAS, but he did not succeed. Then he went to the Belgium court and asked for the Belgium court to explain that the rules of FIFA breach the European rules because the European rules allow you to move freely from one employer to the other, but the FIFA rules hinders these free movements of players. So in the end, to make it a bit more complicated, from the Belgian court, they went to the European court, because the Belgian court asked the European court to explain whether or not FIFA rules are contrary to European law. And in the end, October last year, the European court indeed decided that the certain rules with regard to transfers of players are against European law, mainly against the free movement of players, and are against the competition rules of the European Union. And that relates indeed to the termination of an employment agreement by a player, the compensation that has to be paid to the former club, the joint liability of the new club, and the restriction of a federation to issue a transfer certificate from the one federation to the other. So those three rules of FIFA that were in place at the time, they hinder the free movement, and they are against the competition law of the European Union. Well, that's in general. It's complicated. I understand, and I agree with you. But that in general is the outcome of the Diarra case before the European Court.
Just one other thing here on the players, Dolf, and the Justice for Players Foundation, which is looking at the amount of money that players will have lost because of FIFA's regulations over the last 20 plus years.
That's correct. Yes, we have calculated that there are more or less of 100,000 players involved in this claim, and they were harmed because their negotiation position, due to the FIFA rules, were infringed over a period of 2002, when these these rules were in place till the end of 24, when the European Court declared them null and void. So during that 20-year period of time, 100,000 players have suffered damages because of their diminishing negotiation position. And we have made a economic model which says that approximately 8% of their income over that period of time that they were active as football player is damaged because of the fact that they had not a sufficient position in the negotiations with the clubs.
So if you have 100,000 players, all 8% around underpaid, that's a multi-billion pound claim, I'm guessing.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So we are facing. So what the class action in the Netherlands gives you the opportunity to act on behalf of those 100,000 players. We have now sent a letter to FIFA and the 31 national federations within Europe, and we have requested a meeting to discuss the compensation for those players. And if that will not succeed in an amicable settlement at the end, then it's likely that beginning of next year or end of this year we will go to court and ask the court to provide a solution here.
Would that compensation be coming from FIFA or because it was their rules, or not clubs or anything? I mean, that could
no, clubs are
blow
not
some clubs up, couldn't it?
No, clubs are at the same level as the players. They are more the victims of the system.
Yeah.
But the claim is only on behalf of the players against FIFA and the national federations. So the national federations are jointly liable with FIFA. So therefore, we selected FIFA and 5 other national federations now at the moment that we will will involve in this court case if needed.
And those national federations are?
It's Denmark, it's Belgium, it's Germany, France, and the Netherlands.
But what comes out of that is immediately to me a system within football that is probably broken, but sounds like it might be impossible to fix.
Well, yes, there, of course, it is difficult because you have your employment law. Of each of the countries has its own employment law, and that is above the FIFA rules. So you have to comply with the national legal rules of employment. But the transfer system and the amount that are paid between clubs for players, that will certainly have to change because of this decision of the European Court. And it is difficult to fix. FIFA tried to fix it now for temporarily since the 1st of January with some rules, but even those rules are still hindering players to transfer from one club to the other.
But how? I mean, your area of expertise is sports law. How, if a whole ecosystem is based on transfer fees, which it is, Dolf, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
How can it be fixed so that hundreds of clubs across the globe don't go to the wall when one of their main ways of income and financing is selling players?
Yeah, the selling of players, that will not change in itself because as long as you have a valid employment agreement and you want to break the employment agreement because you want to be transferred to another club, then the 2 clubs will negotiate and the transfer fee will still remain in place. So as long as the ecosystem remains employment agreements, which remains valid before the transfer takes place, then there's nothing wrong. Then it will go smoothly. Then the transfer system will remain. But as soon as players start ending their employment agreement because they want to change from one club to the other, and they do such without just cause, then they have to pay a certain compensation to their former club, which will probably be much lower than a transfer fee. But imagine if you buy a player, so to speak, who has terminated his contract without just cause. You fear, as a new club, of course, that the same will happen to you. So you do not really want to contract a player, I would say, who is not reliable, who you not can trust that he will indeed comply with his obligations.
Do you think that though, Dolf? Because I think a lot of football clubs would take the risk that a player who has broken his contract with one club to move to you, if that's what they want to do, won't do it to you because they want to be with you. I mean, it's a bit like relationships, actually. I think a lot of clubs would take that risk, don't you?
Well, it's a bit opportunistic. You invest in a player, and if he's not reliable in compliance with his employment agreement, why should you invest such enormous amounts? Only for a small time success, maybe for 2 or 3 matches or for a year. I believe that clubs will be very careful contracting a player who has proven not to be reliable. So the ecosystem will change in a way. I believe that agents, clubs, players will have to work together to find indeed a good system in which you can contract reliable players. But yeah, of course, that's maybe idealistic. But I hope that they can find such a solution in the end.
Is the key to this then how contracts are structured and how players are paid? And some people who listen to this podcast will be absolutely sick to death of how sometimes we go over and compare with American sports. But an NFL play, and it's easier, isn't it? Because it's done within an ecosystem of 32 clubs within one country. They're the rules. This is how we do it, and they have their blanket. They have their agreement with the players' union, so everybody agrees the same thing. But contracts are structured in a way that there's guaranteed payments, but there are bonuses. There are, if you get to the end of your contract, then there's a bonus, and so on and so forth. Is the key to football's transfer system down to how players' contracts are structured in the future? So if you do stay for the 5 years of your contract, here's a lump sum at the end of it.
Yeah, that could well be that you indeed give some incentives to continue playing for your club, and in the end you get a bonus. But here as well, the national legislation with regard to employment law is very relevant as well, because in some countries you are not able to pay your if you have an indefinite period of time contract, to terminate such a contract. So I would say that there should be a system in which you comply with your national law, but in addition to that, FIFA has some rules in which indeed a player will be incentivized if they stay on and comply with their agreements. That could well be done. Yeah.
Is there if I took Alexander Isak at the moment at Newcastle, is there a formula by which you go, okay, he wants to, and this is all hypothetical, he wants to terminate his contract, he's got X number of years left, the club he wants to go to are the Premier League champions and are in the Champions League, and therefore if he goes there, plus the years on his contract, the compensation that will be owed to Newcastle is X? Is it down to, do FIFA and European law need to come up with some formula? Is that what it is?
Well, it's comparable to Spain, in which the example of Neymar at the time and Messi had the same, that there are fixed transfer fees. If you leave, then if you break your contract, then you have to pay a certain amount. So it is very clear at this very start what exactly you have to pay to your former employer if you leave. And so then it is a kind of a barrier to leave your club, because you know exactly how to what to pay. And if you do, you need to pay that certain amount, and then the club is benefiting of this high compensation as well. So then it works both ways. So that could be indeed, if you if you put a kind of a penalty and that's agreement, and parties are free to contract. That's not contrary to European law. If you have an agreement with someone else who is indeed willing to agree to that, then there's not a way in which the European law can forbid that.
So would that be an answer, that every league introduces what Spain has in that buyout clause in every contract? Some players in the Premier League do have a buyout clause. We're told that. Others don't. Is one way of trying to navigate through this sort of mess, I suppose, to make sure to ensure that every player has a buyout clause?
Yeah, I think that clubs should introduce in their contract such a clause, and that can be done on a club level. It can be in the rules of the federation as well, that you make one fixed. But I would believe it would be better if clubs and players negotiate about such a clause from case by case, so that it's not in the rules of FIFA or from the FA or whatever, that there is a certain fixed buyout clause, but that you agree, because the one player needs to have a higher buyout clause than a lower ranked player, so to speak. So you make, I would say, by case agreements with players.
But if everybody had one, and admittedly at different levels, as you say, but if everybody had one, it would be a level playing field then, wouldn't it?
It is, yeah. I think that would be a very good solution to avoid the discussion that we had with Diarra.
Do you think a solution is close to this, or do you think we are talking years and years of trying to get something sorted?
No, it should be. I'm not sure how close it is, but I would very much urge parties to fix this, because there are temporary rules in place now, but they are still not, as the experts say, compliable to the EU law. So it is needed to find a system which will be compliant, and that should be the sooner the better.
Do you think this Alexander Isak situation at the moment will be the last of this kind of example of to and fro between clubs and a player? Do you think if something comes in that can solve these kind of messes, this will be the last one we see like this?
No, I don't believe so. There has always discussion on transfers of players, and that will remain, because that the stakes are that high that there will always be discussions, competition between clubs about the player who is leaving from one club to the other. There's a competitor who wants to have the player as well. So there will always be negotiations about transfers.
I don't know what other sports you are across within your remit. Is football the most complicated when it comes to employment?
Yeah, there are but there are many people involved, many stakeholders, agents, clubs, federations. So it is really complicated. So no, but I don't know of any other sports that have these issues of this level. No.
Seems a very good place to leave it. Dolf, thank you very much for coming on and giving us your expertise. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Well, that's it for today. Remember, you can get in touch via email at thesportsagents@global.com or on our socials. We're recording this on Tuesday after another epic sporting weekend that involved, well, it went on beyond the weekend, didn't it, with that England and India test match at the Oval. We're going to talk about that on Thursday, as well as the British and Irish Lions after their Test Series win against Australia. So that will be Thursday's pod, the cricket and the rugby union. And catch up on any of the shows you might have missed on YouTube, Global Player, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe or follow, and I'll see you Thursday.
The Sports Agents
with Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.